Hello everyone and welcome. So, Stormchaser, a new type of linear fusion rifle introduced by Bungie that fires 3 bolts per round, and as we'll find out soon, that 3-bolt mechanic has some interesting effects on how this weapon behaves. I'd now like to say a massive thank you to Leftist Tech Support, who has sent over every clip that you see of this weapon for me to analyse. When we start talking DPS, the perks tested were Accelerated Coils, Rapid Hit, which doesn't matter here as everything was in a Lunar Well, and Vorpal Weapon. I have simulated some numbers with Clown Cartridge and Firing Line, so they'll be at the end as well. Everything was with base reserves, which was 19, and a boss spec mod was equipped for all damage. However, before we talk DPS, I need to discuss this weapon's charge time, or more specifically, the time between rounds. So, typically with a linear or normal fusion rifle, once it fires, the player releases the fire button and then presses it again. There'll be a short delay as the weapon settles down, and only then will it start charging the next round. With Stormchaser, there's more than one opportunity to do this. Release and then press after the 3rd bolt from a round has been fired, or after the 2nd bolt, or even when the 1st bolt has been fired. On screen is a clip of this weapon emptying a magazine with the fire button being released and pressed again after the 3rd bolt. Everything looks normal, but if we compare this to an example where the fire button is released and pressed after the 1st bolt has been fired, this is what happens. Clearly, the example where you try to charge again as early as the 1st bolt is pulling ahead fast. Putting this side by side with Re's Regret, both have a magazine of 5 with accelerated coils, and despite there being 3 bolts per round, Stormchaser actually pulls ahead. They have the same charge time and Stormchaser has 3 bolts to fire per round, so it should fall behind, but the opposite happens. The result of this is Stormchaser can empty a magazine of 5 in the same amount of time as Re's Regret with a magazine of 5 as well. These only even out at the end because for the final round from Stormchaser, you need to wait for the 3 bolts to fire before reloading, whereas Re's Regret can reload almost immediately after firing just that one round. Despite that, this shouldn't happen. Stormchaser fires 3 bolts per round. That takes longer than firing just one. It should never be ahead. So what is actually happening? Well, initially you might think what I did, in that you're charging the weapon while it's still firing the 2nd and 3rd bolts, but it isn't that. On screen now are 2 Stormchaser examples. On the left is the opening round in a magazine, nothing has been fired before this and it's held on the frame with the first visual indication that any charging is happening. On the right is the 3rd and final bolt of a round on the very first frame that it fired. If I let it play out, you can see they fire at the same time, meaning charge time is normal at around 500 milliseconds for an accelerated coils linear fusion rifle. The reason it can shoot so quick is because by repressing the fire button on the 1st bolt, you cancel that settling animation. Going back again to this example and holding it at this frame, the Stormchaser on the left has fired the 3rd bolt in a round, which is when the fire button was pressed, and is now in the settling animation, therefore it can't start charging yet. The Stormchaser on the right had the fire button pressed on the 1st bolt, and that visual effect at the end of the barrel is not from the 3rd bolt. This has started charging again already, letting it play out slowly, and it's not until now that the example on the left begins to charge, while on the right, this is about to start firing its next round. Letting it play again until now, the Stormchaser on the right has fired, while the one on the left is still charging, and in fact, the example on the right can fire all 3 bolts before the example on the left can even fire one. Now, this won't be fixed to the 1st or 3rd bolts, they're just the extremes. You'll be able to press the fire button on the 2nd bolt and end up somewhere in the middle, etc. Now, the settling animation on Re's Regret was around 0.31 seconds, so I'll just say half a second for this next example. Assuming it's identical for Stormchaser, which I can't confirm 100% as I don't know exactly when they were pressing the fire button, that's a half-second saving in time per round in every magazine, not including the final round as you'll be reloading then, which might not sound like much, but for a 5-round mag, that's a 2-second saving, and over 3 to 4 magazines, that's 6 to 8 seconds. That is absolutely huge. Do you want the best from Stormchaser? Then release the fire button and press it again when the 1st bolt has been fired. So what does this mean for DPS? Well, as it turns out, this thing puts out incredible numbers. Nothing I've ever tested can get close. Let's get damage out the way first. Each bolt does 19,683. There are 3 of them, so that's 59,049 per round. Then divide by 2 because testing is against Kali. This means damage per round is 29,525, which consists of 3 lots of 9,842. And this is just with Vorpal Weapon. For a little context, Re's Regret with accelerated coils and firing line does 22,857. That's over 6,500 less, and again, Stormchaser only has Vorpal Weapon for those numbers, and it can roll with firing line, which I will eventually get to. Let's get a quick on-screen test done so you can see some transparency behind the numbers, and then we'll compare this to others on the graph. I'm not putting this side by side with anything else to compare, as it's just not worth the time. No matter what single weapon I put it next to, Linear fusion rifle or not, this will be better for DPS. I only test using full magazines, and because this example could hold 5 in the mag and 19 in reserves, that's just 3 magazines. I will address this at the graph when discussing clown cartridge though. Total damage for 15 rounds came in at 442,868, and it's taken 16.3 seconds to do that damage. This brings DPS to 27,170. Even more context now, Reach Regret with accelerated triple tap and firing line, and Veist Stiner proccing in such a way that you never need to reload, came in with a simulated 24,287 DPS, and Sleeper Simulant averaged 22,075 DPS over 12 rounds, which is 3 full magazines. So yeah, Stormchaser is a little bit overpowered. Let's get it onto the graph to compare with some other linears, and then I'll show simulated numbers for firing line and firing line with clown cartridge. What you're seeing here is Cataclysmic with accelerated coils 4 times the charm and focused fury, Reeds with accelerated triple tap and firing line, the same Reeds Regret again but with Veist Stiner proccing enough so that a reload isn't required, and Sleeper Simulant. Now let me address the elephant in the room first. Bait and switch. Why haven't I tested it on Cataclysmic? Why isn't it on the graph? Where are the enhanced perks? Well, I do have plans made to test this, and originally thought I'd test and include it in this video, but after seeing these Stormchaser numbers early on, I decided I'd rather get this video uploaded ASAP. Not to mention, I don't think anything you can do with bait and switch will get close to Stormchaser, especially when it has firing line. Now let's bring the Vorpal example on first. Immediately it's ahead. Other than that small dip below Reeds around 6 seconds, there's no comparison. For anyone wondering why those 2 Reeds examples don't initially rise at the same rate, which they should do as they have the same damage, I made a video explaining things like this back in May of 2021, so there's a link to that in the description down below in case anyone is curious and wants to watch it. So yes, not really much to analyse or discuss. It's significantly better at everything except total damage compared to the other legendaries, but that's mostly just because they have triple tap or 4 times the charm, so we're generating extra ammo from thin air, and Stormchaser has only been tested with 15 rounds at this point. So if it's this good with Vorpal, let's bring on firing line. No change to timings, but it does more damage at any given point. Unlike with Vorpal, this doesn't drop behind Reeds around that 6-second mark. Once again, not much to say, it's just better everywhere except total damage. Now, clown cartridge with firing line, I've simulated this so that all 19 rounds from reserves are used. With the other 2 examples, 4 were left out. So with clown cartridge, there's a magazine of 7 and then 2 magazines of 6 for a total of 19. Coming onto the graph now, and what else did you expect? Even better again. I know there's an element of RNG with clown cartridge, but it will still guarantee an increase of +1 to the magazine. So what are my thoughts? Well, all is not as it seems, and this isn't a perfect DPS weapon. Landing all 3 of those bolts in a round is harder than it may seem against a target that even moves just a little. And a body shot against Kali was less than 3,000, so DPS will tank if you consistently miss bolts. If this is something you really struggle with, then I'd recommend one of the other linear options on screen. I'm not sure if the bypassing of the settling down animation is something Bungie are aware of, as I can't see it being intentional. If it's taken 2 seconds longer to empty a magazine of 5, then for 3 magazines, that would put it at around 21,665 DPS, which is suspiciously similar to Reach Regret without Veist Stiner. So it's possible Bungie have balanced this weapon's damage based on that, and the animation cancelling has gone unnoticed. I could be wrong, as I am just speculating, but expect some tuning of this weapon in the future. It just can't stay this strong. There's no reason to use any other linear fusion rifle for DPS if you have a well-rolled Stormchaser, unless you really struggle landing every bolt per round, or have a build that requires particular elemental damage for good synergy. Enjoy this while you can, as I think a nerf to damage or removal of the animation cancelling will be incoming. We did see this with double slugs hot swapping after all. And that is all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful and interesting. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.